Welcome to Swala Nyeti, the law podcast that pairs a layman and a lawyer to answer your legal questions of the day. Swala Nyeti is sponsored by the law firm of Kigwata and Company Advocates and is intended for educational purposes only.
Welcome to episode 24 of Swala Nyeti. I am the lawyer, aka Wakili, Harry Karanja, and I am joined here by the layman, Gashao Patrick. Hey Gashao.
Hi Wakili man. You know, it's almost football season. It has started. So it's that time in the house when we ask back for the remotes. Have you ever seen that?
Well, I follow only Goma here and AFC Leopards.
Wakili. Okay, I'm not saying that it's boring to do that. I think the Mashemeji Derby.
Yes, Mashemeji Derby. Yes.
It's one of the best things that ever happened to Kenyan football.
Absolutely.
But more of it is that, we watch a lot of English Premier League, La Liga, Italian, And so how this works is on weekends the games come, are broadcasted on TV. And therefore we have to have, I don't know how to, like quarantine. Somebody has to be quarantined during games because we need the remote. We need to watch the games.
Yes.
So it's that time of the season, the year again, and so you can imagine the battles in the houses.
Well, maybe we'll do a podcast day on
my legal rights
with a remote.
Yes. That is a brilliant idea. I like it.
Please delete this part after recording. Anyway, today we are still on employment, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what are we discussing?
We are on the issue of terminal benefits. And we had a very intriguing question because let me just read it for you. My name is Richard and I can tell you we are receiving and enjoying your podcast loud and clear here in Eldoret. Thank you very much, Richard. Hope you can help me with my issue. I have had a dream job with an NGO for the last 10 years. That was until COVID-19 happened. All of a sudden, I noticed they were not paying on time. When I asked, they would tell me that I had to finish some project reports before they could get enough money. And even when they paid, it was in installments, paid slowly over the whole month, making it tough for me to meet my bills. They now keep adding more tasks, some which are very different from my job description, and making it almost impossible to finish, which is a condition to be paid. When I complained, they told me I was even lucky I have a job, but if I'm to quit, they can only pay me my terminal benefits over 12 months. Is that fair?
All right, so let me understand Richard's situation. Pole sana Richard, it sounds like you're going through a tough time. You have been employed for over 10 years with an NGO, and the NGO till recently had been paying you well. But now, since COVID happened, they are paying you piecemeal. They are adding you a lot of duties, and they're telling you that these new duties you're being given are the only ones that will allow them to pay you. And when you raise this, they gave you a condition that you could quit, but you would only be paid your terminal benefit over 1 year.
Correct, Wakili. And to have given somebody 10 years of your life, and for them to start changing things to pay you just after the job is done, and even worse, to pay you slowly over a month. And when you raise that issue, for them to give you such a condition seems very unfair.
Well, I can understand why you feel that way and that sort of thinking. And Richard also brings up the issue of fairness. There are two things which I'm seeing that we need to establish whether they are fair or not. And the first is the possibility of the employer paying terminal benefits over 1 year. But in addition to that, there could be a case for constructive dismissal.
Dismissal?
Yes, in the way that the employer is handling this situation with Richard.
You know the word constructive dismissal?
Yes.
Sounds like an oxymoron. Like constructive is a good thing on one end.
Yes.
Dismissal is bad on the other.
Well, in this case, it's usually not a good thing. And constructive dismissal, while there is no specific definition in our employment laws, it is a concept where an employer would bring an employment contract to an end by taking such actions that effectively terminate it. And these actions are usually to make the employee's life so intolerable at his place of employment that he has no option but to consider that he has been dismissed from his duties.
Wow. So who brings up constructive dismissal? The employer.
No, it would be the employee.
So the employee can go and say, I have been constructively dismissed. Okay, not that way, but in a sense that I am being pushed out of my office.
Essentially, yes. And what happens is constructive dismissal will usually be tied to an employee's case for unfair termination. So whereas the employer might not have taken that action of terminating the contract, his actions effectively or constructively brought that employment contract to an end.
Sorry, Wakili, to cut you short. Are there conditions to be considered under unfair termination?
Before we even get to unfair termination, because usually unfair termination is whereby the employer has taken the action to terminate.
Okay. Yeah.
For something I just want to mention when it comes to constructive dismissal. Constructive dismissal, like I said, is where the employer makes the conditions so intolerable, so unbearable that the employee feels like they have no option but to leave. Like one, which is giving them impossible tasks to accomplish. But something else that needs to be kept in mind by the employee is that you cannot just hang around in the place of employment as you're being given these impossible tasks. You must take action. You must usually resign from your place of employment. So if you're going to court and you're going to claim constructive dismissal, usually you've done so by showing that you mitigated the whatever damage or whatever suffering you are going to go through by resigning.
So, just to clarify something, before you go to court for constructive dismissal case, you must have resigned.
You are highly recommended to have resigned.
You resign first, then you go to court.
Yes, resign first. Actually, let's say you resign first, then go to court.
Okay.
Now, if you are in court, you are suing for unfair termination. And I think you had...
I had alluded to it.
You had alluded?
You had mentioned...
And you had asked what would constitute unfair termination.
Yes.
Okay. So unfair termination, there are usually three things that will be looked at. One, was the reason for your termination valid?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, was the reason fair?
To me or to the employer?
To you.
To me.
To you. Was it fair? I mean, were you being terminated because, you are of your competence or your capability for the job? Were you being terminated because the operational requirements of the company have changed? Okay, those would determine whether it was fair. Even if the reason was valid, you also have to determine that the reason was fair. And lastly, of course, there is a process under the law to follow when you are going to terminate. So if you don't follow that process, for example, giving notice as required, then it can be considered that termination was unfair.
So if the employer did not give me notice, that might constitute unfair dismissal.
Unfair termination.
Termination.
Yes.
Okay.
If there was no notice given, that could constitute unfair termination.
Okay. Just for the purpose of the listeners, for the Wakili, termination and dismissal are not interchangeable. It's unfair termination, not unfair dismissal. And it's constructive dismissal, not constructive termination.
You are really becoming the Wakili, very keen on specific terminology.
Because you keep correcting me. I say constructive termination, no, constructive dismissal.
Okay.
So Wakili, if he goes for this unfair termination, can he force the employer to pay him?
Can he force the employer to pay him? He can, first of all, if the court agrees that it was an unfair termination, he can receive any outstanding dues which are owed to him. And the court can also direct that he be paid as damages an amount that does not exceed 12 months of his salary.
And I have heard of instances where people have been reinstated Is that true?
Yes, it's possible. One of the remedies that someone can get an unfair termination is to be reinstated in the job that you were in. And you can also be, let's assume that the job is no longer available, then the employer can also be ordered to re-engage you with similar duties and at a similar salary scale.
And it's like a different job at the same.
Yes,
group.
but a job which you are
I'm qualified
competent
for,
yeah,
yeah.
of course.
I can't imagine somebody making me the wakili of their farm because they took away my job.
Yeah, usually that wouldn't happen.
Okay, and then what happens to the leave days?
The leave days, if there are any unpaid leave days, then they have to also be settled. And any other terminal benefits that we spoke about. So it could be severance, which will need to be settled. If there are any statutory deductions which are due and pending, they have to be paid. So the court could direct for all of these to be paid.
Well, it's interesting to be reinstated in a job where you quit because of passive aggression. Then constructive dismissal part. A person is already pushing you out, then the court is pushing you back. It's just funny what should a man do,
But we've said you have the option. You can either choose to go back. It depends what you ask the court for.
Okay, at least we have these options.
Yes.
Wow, it's interesting. This, I think we should do something about maybe terminal benefits or unfair dismissal. A whole episode on unfair.
You're back to unfair dismissal. We said
Yes.
it's unfair termination and constructive dismissal.
My dear listeners, unfair termination and constructive dismissal.
Absolutely.
Do something about unfair termination.
I'm sure we'll come back to this topic in future.
Yeah.
All right.
Looking forward to that.
The other question now comes in on the issue of terminal benefits.
Yeah.
Okay. Because he's asked if they were to pay him terminal benefits over 1 year.
12 months.
Now, usually when you are letting someone go, you need to pay them whatever is outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, of course, possible to enter an agreement. It's possible to enter an agreement with your employer on how they will pay you the outstanding dues. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
That doesn't mean you have to agree.
Okay.
But
Phew.
it is possible to enter into such an agreement. And if the employer is genuinely struggling to make the payments, it's something that the employee could consider. But for you to use that as a threat,
Yeah.
now that would go back probably to add on to the whole unfairness of the termination, or to add on to the reasons why you can say that this was a constructive dismissal.
Okay. And I find it strange because what if I want my money up front and I might run the risk that I spread it to be paid over 12 months, spread it out, and then the farm collapses the finances become tight and they don't pay me. Then what do I do?
Well, you then probably will have to go and look for relief under insolvency laws. But
That's a new
that's a
new Pandora's
that's a whole new Pandora's box.
Okay.
But I think in this case, we've said you have to make the determination based on your circumstances and what you're seeing would work best.
Okay, so I think therefore Richard has no option than to obey what the NGO is saying then.
Well, Gashao, I think I said that he has an option to pursue unfair termination under constructive dismissal. Because
There are a lot of terms, Wakil.
just because the NGO is suffering does not give them a right to make other people suffer.
Okay.
If this person has, as you've said, worked for 10 years
Yeah.
at the firm, then it is only right for the process to terminate this relationship to be followed.
There you have it, Richard. You have an option of seeking unfair termination and constructive dismissal. It's within your reach to do that. And once more, sorry for what you're undergoing. And thank you for everyone else for listening to this episode of Swala Nyeti. Join us tomorrow for a new one. And this is it. Can I be forced to pay my house help 20,000 per month if she does not live with me? Like if she moves out, can I be forced to pay her 20,000? Until tomorrow, have a lovely day. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
You have been listening to Swala Nyeti. Special thanks to our layman, Gashal Patrick, and our lawyer, Harry Karanja. If you have a legal question that you want answered, send us a WhatsApp message on 0708 111 or email us at admin@swalanyeti.org. You can find downloads to all our podcast episodes on our website www.swalanyeti.org.